Let me tell you about the day I watched a woman pack up her entire desk in rage because she thought she could humiliate me, report me to HR, and walk away clean. She had no idea what was waiting for her in that meeting room. But before we get there, I need to back you up a few years because none of this makes sense without the part that almost broke me. I was 24 when my mom died of breast cancer. Both of my grandmothers had already gone the same way. So yeah, after I buried my mom, I dragged myself to a specialist and asked them to screen me. And sure enough, they found it. Precancerous cells sitting in my breast tissue like a ticking clock. The doctor gave me 3 options. I could do screenings every few months and just wait. Or I could have one breast removed and keep monitoring the other. Or I could go all the way bilateral mastectomy, remove everything, eliminate the risk completely. I thought about what cancer looked like on my mom in those final months. And I said, take it all. What nobody really prepared me for was the scarring. I was told it'd be minor. It wasn't. I came out of that surgery with 2 huge, raised, bright pink scars. Jagged, wide, impossible to ignore, and I fell apart. I stopped leaving my apartment. I threw out every mirror in my place. I got physically sick looking at myself. This wasn't vanity. This was my body feeling like a crime scene. My therapist eventually sent me to a plastic surgeon, not to chase some beauty standard, but because she could see I was drowning. The surgeon gave me a few options. The cream didn't work. The laser was risky and expensive, so I went with implants, just enough to cover the scars. My natural size had been an F cup, so I went with a DD. And slowly, I started to feel human again. Fast forward to 28. I'm working in an office in the suburbs outside of Chicago. Good job, decent coworkers. I'm doing all right. Life has genuinely gotten better. And then there's Kayla. Kayla found out I had implants the way nosy people always find out things that aren't their business. She overheard a conversation. My friend and I were planning a vacation, and she made a joke about flying with implants, the way close friends do. Just a quick laugh between us. Except Kayla was nearby, and by the end of that same work day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job. But here's the thing, they didn't know why. Over the next 3 months, Kayla made it her personal mission to humiliate me. Comments to coworkers when I was just barely out of earshot. Little digs disguised as jokes. She told people I had more plastic than Barbie. She called me fake in 2 ways. One of my friends told me she once referred to me behind my back as a sack of silicone. I asked her to stop. More than once. 4 times, actually, over 3 months. But every time I got her alone, elevator, women's bathroom, she'd just brush it off. No cameras, no witnesses. 3 comments a week, minimum, for 12 straight weeks. I was keeping count, and then came lunch. It was a regular Tuesday, me, Kayla, and a handful of coworkers sitting around the lunch table. Normal conversation. And I used the word shallow, casually, in a completely unrelated sentence. Without missing a beat, Kayla looked right at my chest, gestured at it, and said, "You'd know all about being shallow." I went completely still, and then something in me just snapped. I looked her dead in the face, and I said, "Do you know why I have these?" A few years ago, doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had a mastectomy and was left with massive scars on my chest. I went to therapy. My therapist sent me to a surgeon. The surgeon suggested implants to cover the scars so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first. I picked up my food. and I walked out. Now, about a third of the office came to me afterward to offer support. The other portion told me I was being a bitch. I told them Kayla had a 3-month head start on that title. Then came the email from HR. They wanted to meet with me the next morning. The name on the email? Debbie. A woman I knew was Kayla's close friend. And suddenly, this wasn't just a meeting, this was a setup. Debbie had almost certainly already decided how this was going to end. She was going to walk me in, sit me down, and recommend they fire me. What she didn't know was what I was about to walk in with. That night I got to work. I went through my employee contract, every page, until I found it. A clause buried in the complaints section. I had the contractual right to request a different reviewer if I believed my assigned one was biased. They called it an impartial overseer. I photocopied that page, highlighted the exact paragraph. Then I got on Facebook. I messaged every single person who had offered me support and said, HR called me in. Did you witness Kayla say anything to you about me? Are you willing to put it in writing? Not everyone was brave enough to step up. Kayla had connections in management and people were scared. But 20 people said yes. I asked them to write a signed statement, name, date, approximate time, what they heard, verbatim if possible. I showed up to work early the next morning and collected those letters one by one. I ended up with 16 signed statements. Some were a paragraph. Some had bullet-pointed lists. And it turned out Kayla hadn't just been going after me. One coworker had documented comments Kayla made about someone's weight. Another had written down something anti-Semitic Kayla had said about a colleague's nose. This woman had been running a one-person harassment operation, and everybody had just been too afraid to say anything until now. I walked into that HR office at 10 a.m. with a folder. Inside, the 16 letters, the photocopied contract page, my handwritten timeline of every time I'd asked Kayla to stop, and a list of every witness present at that lunch table. Debbie stood up from her desk, ready to lead me into the back room. I turned to the other HR rep standing nearby and said, "So is my meeting with you then?" Debbie said no. I was with her. I told her, calmly, politely, that I had a problem with that because my contract guaranteed me an impartial overseer, and I had good reason to believe she couldn't be impartial here. I held up the photocopied page. I didn't hand it over. There was a shredder 3 feet away, and I wasn't taking any chances. Debbie stomped off to get her supervisor. Her supervisor came out, asked me why I was challenging the assignment. I told him I had it on solid authority that the person who filed this complaint against me was Debbie's close friend. He asked Debbie directly if that was true. Debbie's only response was, "I can be impartial." The supervisor took a long breath, and then all 4 of us went into that room together. The interview went for over 30 minutes. They asked me the same questions about 8 different ways. Standard HR tactic, trying to catch inconsistencies. I didn't have any. I walked them through the precancerous cells, the mastectomy, the therapy, the scars, the implants. I told them all of it was in my medical file, which they had full permission to review.
I laid out the timeline
of harassment. I answered every question without flinching. When they asked about the lunchroom confrontation, I reminded them there were cameras in there. I gave them the exact time and a list of every name at that table. When they asked why I hadn't come to HR sooner, I said it clearly. I had no issue with Kayla. She had an issue with me. I asked her to stop multiple times. She didn't. I eventually said something back. The supervisor stood up, shook my hand, and told me I'd hear from them once they reviewed everything. I went back to my desk and I quietly pulled up my resume because I genuinely wasn't sure how this would go. Then the dominoes started falling. First, the coworkers who had written letters got called in, one by one, each gone about 10 minutes. Then the people who were at the lunch table, then Kayla. Kayla was in there for 30 minutes. She came out furious, glaring at me across the room. I kept my eyes on my screen. Then at 4:30, they called her back in again. At 5 p.m., as people were grabbing their bags to leave, Kayla came storming back into that office. She packed up her entire desk while staring at me. She told anyone who would listen that I'd gotten her fired. She shoved her way onto the elevator, and then my inbox lit up. One email from HR. Your case is closed. 3 months of jokes. 16 people brave enough to put their names on paper. One clause buried in an employment contract. And one woman who thought she was untouchable right up until the moment she wasn't. She came for me in the one place I was most vulnerable. She had no idea she was walking into a fight I'd already won.